Hey listeners, the episode you're about to hear is one that we recorded before our first episode aired. This podcast is a passion project for both of us, and we're learning a lot as we go, mostly learning from our own mistakes. Unfortunately, with this episode, we didn't have that opportunity because we hadn't yet heard our mistakes, so please excuse the imperfect audio quality, awkward pauses, excessive ums, and background acknowledgments. Editing can only correct so much, but we really appreciate you taking the time to listen and grow with us, and we'll be doing our best to improve in future episodes.
Hello, and welcome to Lion and Mouse Commentary. We are your hosts, Holland
And Tori.
Two best friends as different as a lion and a mouse. Today we are reviewing Stranger Things Season 1, and we will be ranking it on an objective scale of 0 to 10 with only 2 points allotted for personal taste. Feel free to agree, disagree, or just learn about something new. Just be sure to tread lightly, there are spoilers ahead. And cut to the intro. Welcome to the Lion's Den, safe enough to host a mouse. For our new listeners, we will be breaking down the scoring system by category as we go, but the full breakdown is also available on our socials and our website. So let's get started. So today I chose Stranger Things Season 1 for us to review. We have both seen this prior to reviewing it and watching it for this episode. This is my choice because I really do enjoy the show. It's a TV series released by Netflix on July 15th, 2016. There are 8 episodes in Season 1. It's the first of 4 seasons. Season 4, as of the date we are recording, has yet to be released, but it will be released in part 1 and 2, I believe. It was created by the Duffer Brothers, Matt and Ross Duffer. It was additionally produced by Sean Levy and Dan Cohen. It stars Winona Ryder, David Harbour, Finn Wolfhard, Millie Bobby Brown, Gaten Mazzarato, and Caleb McLaughlin. That's the top 6 billed cast of the show. In the first 35 days of release, the ratings reported that 14.07 million adults had watched Season 1.
That's pretty incredible.
It was a pretty big smash hit when it was released, and it continues to be a very popular series. The Wikipedia synopsis of the show is the first season begins in November 1983 when researchers at Hawkins National Laboratory open a rift to the Upside Down, which is an alternate dimension that reflects into the real world. A monstrous humanoid creature escapes and abducts a boy named Will Byers and a teenage girl named Barbara Holland. Will's mother, Joyce, and the town's police chief, Jim Hopper, search for Will. At the same time, a young psychokinetic girl who goes by the name 11 escapes from the laboratory and assists Will's friends, Mike, Dustin, and Lucas, in their own efforts to find Will. So that is the Wikipedia summary. If you don't want any more spoilers, stop listening now, go watch it for yourself, but we are going to go ahead and get into our first category.
So our first category is plot, story, and cohesion. And one thing for TV shows is that we wanted to make sure that there was some sort of resolution through the season, since we're not doing this in any wider analysis than one season at a time. We had sort of wanted to see what happens in the course of just that season.
Correct.
So I also kind of want to let everybody know that this is going to be our longest episode yet and may be split into 2 parts. Me and Holland have pages of notes for the first time. All of our other episodes had a page of notes, and we each have pages now, and with very small print. So
yeah, this is a massive undertaking to do Season 1. When we made that decision, we didn't think about how long it would take for us to review each category.
So moving forward, we may do TV shows in sections of 4 or 5 episodes instead of entire seasons, just because we didn't understand the undertaking at the original choosing of this. So anyway, but moving into plot, story, and cohesion, 2 total points allotted. I gave it 2 out of 2 points.
Excellent.
I think there's a lot of really positive things about the plot, and I'm just going to dive in. I'm going to try to be as concise as possible because I know we have so much to get through. But all of my notes are going to be kind of chronological, as in, because I've been taking notes as I go, so it's going to kind of start at the beginning and go through the end
Right.
So, I think foreshadowing at its finest happens in episode 1. They're all playing Dungeons and Dragons, and Will goes, "The Demigorgon, it got me."
Yeah.
And you're like, you shouldn't have spoken that into existence, Will. I think it's, but I think it's tasteful foreshadowing. Sometimes I think foreshadowing can be too direct, and while this is quite direct foreshadowing, I think it's very effective foreshadowing. I think the introduction of 11 is pretty brilliant. The pacing slows down a little bit. There's a lot of like these slow drawn out moments and beats, and it sort of makes the audience tense and worried. You have no idea like who she is. Why is she not saying anything? Why is her head shaved? Why is she in a hospital gown? There's a lot of questions that get raised within just seconds of her introduction. I think in episode 1, the pacing is basically perfect. I don't think that's always the case through the series, but I think in episode 1, the pacing is pretty much perfect. Going into episode 2, we start to sort of get these context clues to Eleven's past and condition. We start to see sort of these flashbacks into the laboratory and kind of what she's been through, the sorts of things that they would prompt her to do. I think there's also, we get some context clues even in just some of her current behavior. So there's a scene where they give her some clothes to change into, and Mike is like, you can go change in the bathroom, and she just does not want the door closed. And you're like, what? Like, what kid is so afraid of being in a closed room?
Right.
You start to, just these small little snippets of like, why is that such a big deal for her?
Right.
So I think in a situation like that, it's kind of, and because you have so much more time in a TV series, you get to have these moments where you just slowly peel back the layers. Mm-hmm. It doesn't have to be like a big reveal into the past of any character, because you're given so much time to explore that. I think that season 1 starts to change pace around, it's all centered around what I would call or label Joyce's unraveling.
Yeah.
These manic moments that we get from Joyce feel faster, and then the show seems to slow when the focus shifts away from her.
Yeah.
So that's kind of why I labeled it like her unraveling, and I think it drives a lot of the momentum of the show, and they move the plot a little faster when she's having like a breakdown.
Yeah.
And she's not always having a breakdown during the series. I mean, don't get me wrong, she's always worried and tense and, you know, acting weirdly, but I would say like it's the manic moments that sort of launch you into like the next part of the momentum.
Yeah.
I'm going through these notes really fast, but I just feel like we have so much to talk about. I wanted to give everything a proper time. So many things trigger experiment memories for 11. And to me, it was just notable to see like how much abuse she went through in the name of science. And I think it's a plot point that really drives home to the viewer that she is a young child. And I think sometimes as a viewer, you need to have that put back into perspective, because you start to see her with other children her age that are children and just being children, and she's been completely deprived of that. Mm-hmm. She has absolutely no experience being a child.
Yeah.
She's just been abused in a laboratory for science for as long as we know. Mm-hmm. You know, there's not a clear cut like, when did this start for her? Mm-hmm. It's just all she's ever known, and it's all we ever see her remembering. Right. She has really no positive memories that she ever flashes back to. Every flashback that 11 has is something terrifying. Mm-hmm. Something that, you know, adults shouldn't have to go through, let alone children 11's age. Right. So I think it's just, it sort of makes you build this sort of hatred for what is now being led to be the antagonist. And I think a lot of times people are watching Stranger Things and they're like, what's the antagonist? Oh, it's the Demigorgon. the Demigorgon's the antagonist, and don't get me wrong, Demigorgon out here stealing people or whatever.
Yeah, it's like the most obvious villain.
But it's really not the villain of the series.
Right.
The villain of the series is Hawkins' lab and the people heading that up.
Right.
Mainly the doctor, what's his name? Dr.
Brenner.
Dr. Brenner.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but then, okay, so moving on, there is a super pivot in the story, and that's when Hop goes to the bar and gets confirmation that Will's body wasn't legit.
Yeah.
He gets confirmation from that guy. He's chilling at the bar. Dude doesn't know who he is, and he gets that information out of him, and it shifts the whole story. There's a whole pivot there. I think it kind of leads us into, okay, now something can be done about this.
Right.
I think there's a part in every story that it should feel almost hopeless. And then something, whatever that catalyst is, makes you feel like, now we can do something about this. And for season 1, I think that's the moment where you're like, now something can be done about this. Hop has the confirmation that he needs, and now he can do something about this. This is a side note, but they kind of show in one of the flashbacks, or no, it's when Hop goes to Hawkins' lab and he finds the room that Eld used to live in, and there's a drawing of Papa and a little child, and I think it is one of the most unsettling story pieces in the entire thing.
Yeah.
Because how incredibly sad is it that 11, all she's ever known for any sort of care or guardianship is this crazy lunatic, abusive scientist man.
Yeah.
And like, it just like broke my heart for her, because it's like, this is all she knows as any sort of parent figure, and like, she deserves so much better than that.
Yeah.
So I think it's just like an unsettling piece, and there's no dialogue associated with it.
Right.
It's just him seeing the picture, and it's just incredibly unsettling.
Yeah.
I did notice some incontinuities.
Yeah.
Or a incontinuity. So, after Jonathan and Nancy decide that they're going to start to hunt the Demigorgon, Jonathan says in that scene that he was 10 when he had to kill that rabbit.
Yeah, his dad made him.
Yep.
Yeah.
But then later, in the same scene, she's like, are you sure when they see the deer, she's like, are you sure you can do this? And he's like, I'm not 9 anymore. And I was like, hold up.
Yeah.
Is that an incontinuity?
Yeah, it is.
Sure sounds like an incontinuity. I don't know if he delivered the line wrong.
Right.
Or if, my guess is that it was an incontinuity in the script, and they filmed those parts of the scene completely separate days.
Oh, yeah.
And so nobody caught it. Yeah, nobody caught it, or if it was supposed to be like that, it's incontinuous for the viewer.
Right.
And you're like, you just said you were 10 here, and now you're saying you're not 9 anymore? Like,
yeah.
What does that mean?
That's a good catch.
So I don't know. I do have a small note in here that says, if this show doesn't make you distrust the government, what will?
Right. Yeah.
And then another thing I wrote is like, where do you find all of these lab people? Like, how do you interview these people? What duties do you describe for them? Like, where did all these people come from?
Yeah.
Like, are they... I mean, obviously they're not all scientists. There's guards and, probably janitors and stuff. And it's like, how do you be like, yes, please come work for our crazy scientific lab where we do experiments on children, outside of their consent?
Well, in the story, because I made a note of this and I wanted to see kind of how the story would kind of justify as it unfolds. It's the Department of Energy. That the building, the lab, it's the Department of Energy. So usajobs.gov would be where you would apply to those jobs. That's how they get their people. Right.
But like, you show up for your first day and you're like,
no, I know.
So what's this place about? Yeah. So here's our collection of kidnapped children. We're gonna do some psycho, experiments on them and see what their minds can do. I'd be like, I'm going to go home now.
Yeah, I'm sure they would probably vet you extensively before they'd let you into that area of the department.
I guess, but
they'd probably have to blackmail on you before they'd let you get there.
I was just watching this like,
like, how do you find people to do this stuff? Like, is there this many psycho people in the world? But I guess there might be. Who knows?
Yeah, well, I mean, like, you know, the information that's come out on these unethical experiments that the government has funded,
That's
or
true.
that, you know, laboratories have conducted, and, you know, it has happened, so clearly...
It is a parallel to the real world, I suppose.
Right.
I only have 2 more plot notes. One of those is I got goosebumps both times I watched season 1. In the scene where 11 is in the bath, the pool, because she's trying to find Will and Barbara. And she starts to panic in the water. And Joyce literally just, like, holds her until she calmed down. And it gave me goosebumps because 11 has never had this, ever. And so she always associates this bath, this immersion, the saltwater immersion, with, like, the most panicky, anxious memories. And so I think giving her the opportunity to be comforted in that moment when she knows she's doing it to try to be helpful, because that's 11's goal. Like, she just wants to be helpful to these kids.
Right.
And, you know, but doing so causes her so much anxiety because of all she's been through. And so I think having that moment where she can kind of be comforted at the end of that was really important to not just 11's, like, storytelling, but also Joyce's.
Yeah.
Because it kind of just solidifies that, like, Joyce's only concern is the children, and that's why she's so concerned for her own son, of course. And so now she has this girl that she doesn't know that's doing everything in her power to try to find her son, and so she just takes so much compassion on her, and I think that's a really nice moment in the story.
Yeah.
And then at the very end of the season, there was the parallel cuts between Joyce giving Will CPR. Well, Joyce and Hopper giving Will CPR, and now we're cutting back to Hopper's memories of them giving Sarah CPR in the hospital as she was dying.
Right.
And I was just like, it just, like, rips your heart, you know? And you're watching this and you're like, oh, he's been here before and he's seen it not end well. And here he is again, seeing it happen again. Is it going to end well? Like, you don't want him to have to go through that again. So you're kind of, like, rooting not just for Will and Joyce, but now you're rooting for Hop, too, because you're like, he's done so much work for them, and you really don't want to see it come up, like, as a bad ending.
Right.
So I think it was kind of just like a nice final worry of the series was that. So I thought it was really good kind of seeing that parallel, that he's been through this before, and here we are again.
Yeah.
So that's all my plot notes. 2 out of 2 points.
All right. Well, I gave it 1.5 points out of 2, since we can do half points in our ranking system. I give it 1.5 out of 2. I'll explain where the half point kind of, where, you know, why, because I really enjoyed it to the point where I think it could merit a 2 out of 2. So I don't disagree with your rating, but I'll explain why I kind of took half a point off. So the... You know, positives, I think, with the kind of the plot, the story, and the cohesion of this series, or this first season, I agree. I think the pacing is excellent. I think that it's a very compelling story. It really grabs you and kind of pulls you into this kind of small town feel. I think overall it balances kind of humor and suspense very well. You don't watch an episode and at the end of it you're exhausted because you were on edge the whole time. So I think it does a great job of kind of telling you this story, and it gives you this moment of intensity and this suspense, but then it gives you a little bit of levity. It lets you kind of laugh at these kids or laugh at something that's happened and kind of enjoy something, or like, you know, it takes place in, you know, the 1980s, so you see something that's kind of nostalgic if you grew up in the 80s, and so you have these moments where there's some levity blended with this, you know, very intense story. So overall, I think the story's told very well. I think the dialogue and the writing is exceptional. One of the things that I really enjoyed about watching the show was I kept taking notes, trying to find why this character said this, and why are they showing us this, you know, moment? Why is this character saying this? And then, you know, the next episode or a couple episodes later, that was explained. There was a reason for it. I think in delivering the story, they did a great job of every moment was necessary, and the whole plot kind of unfolded like an onion. You just peeled back another layer and it's like, oh, that's why this character said this earlier. You peel back another, like, oh, that's why this happened. So overall, a couple kind of specific notes I have. I think the scene where they're showing these search parties of people looking for Will, and it's like the whole town is out there. It gives you this sense of this is a small town where everybody knows everybody. The school has an assembly for Will because he's missing. Karen brings Joyce a casserole. So it just really, these small moments, Hopper knows everybody. They know, Hopper and Joyce, know other people. So all the characters in the town feel very connected, and it gives you reason to empathize for all of these people because you feel like you've just stepped into this very small town.
Yeah, one thing I did notice is that it's almost like everybody in the town is like rooting for the return of Will and Barbara.
Right. I think that I wrote that I think episode 4 is really the turning point in the series. That's when you start to learn that all these quote unquote crazy people are the ones who are right. So I think one thing in the story that they do a really good job of when you're watching this is you don't know if Joyce is crazy or not. Mm-hmm. And that was one thing, like in the rewatch of this show, I kind of wish that I could go back and watch it for the first time with, kind of like wipe my memory like Men in Black and be able to watch it for the first time. Because there were a couple of things that I kind of noticed, and I was discussing it with my brother, and he was like, but I think the purpose of that is because you don't know if Joyce is crazy or not. You don't know if she's having a mental breakdown and if she's really seeing these things happen.
You really couldn't blame her if she was because of the amount of stress she's under.
Right.
So you don't hate her for it even before you know she's not actually crazy.
Right. And it's like when you see, the Demogorgon start to press through the wall of her home and she chops a hole in the wall with an axe, you question, did she really see that? Or did she just think she saw that? We don't know. Like, as the viewer, it does a great job of you're kind of having these moments where you're like, is this woman really crazy or is she right all along? And I think episode 4, you really get that turning point where you're like, oh, she was right all along. And kind of like that episode 5 with the funeral scene. Like you're seeing, these kids and, Joyce, and they're having a funeral for Will, and like none of them are buying it. So these kind of moments where Joyce being like, is she crazy or not? The moments in that storytelling, I think, are done really well, where, people are saying like, she's been, a few steps away from the edge for a while. And so I think that's really good. I think they do a great job. There's kind of this symmetry in connecting. When Will goes missing, 11 is found. So I think that's a great symmetry. Will has left this really well integrated friend group, and now 11 has been found by this friend group. And so she doesn't in any way take his place, but I think that's good symmetry in that storytelling.
That's a good point. I never would have thought of that.
Yeah. And I think that in that kind of symmetry there, Hopper is kind of the thread between them that kind of pushes that story forward as to something's going on, something is wrong. And he's kind of the one that has to kind of fill that out. Like an example of where I was like, this doesn't really make any sense. You see Hopper. There's a scene where they show Hopper in bed with this random woman, and he gets up and she comes out and checks on him, and you're like, why is this scene in this movie? Is this supposed to like paint Hopper as this womanizer? Like, what's the point of this? Like, is this part of his, just part of his character? But then, it feels like it doesn't make any sense and it doesn't fit into the story at all. But then you later see this is the librarian that he's talking to in the library that, he wants her help when he's looking through this microfilm. Mm-hmm. I kind of felt like that was still a little unnecessary.
Yeah, I agree.
I think it's a little inconsistent because it's this one moment where you see Hopper as this, this dirtbag who's kind of sleeping around. But then it's like, she just happens to be the librarian too. So I felt like that was a little, another aspect of the plot that I thought was kind of, I don't know if it's really a plot hole or if it's just unnecessary, but the scene where Jonathan goes to Lonnie's house and to go talk to his dad, and he kind of confronts his dad. It's kind of like, why is this in this? When that happened, it was a little jarring. I was like, this doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. In one sense it does, because when a child goes missing, typically they were, if they were abducted, it was a family member that was responsible for that, like in, real world situations. So did they put that in there because, oh, well, if Will's missing, maybe his dad had something to do with it, and so Jonathan goes to Lonnie to talk to him about it.
Or even if he didn't have anything to do about it, would Will have stopped by?
Right.
Would he have... There's so many possibilities.
Right.
So, yeah.
But that's never really explained. One thing I kind of thought was maybe they did that because that kind of plants the seed in Jonathan's mind, because he's then becomes so against his mom. He's so unsupportive of his mom, being like, he now thinks that, his mom is crazy. So I thought maybe that was the point of that, but it wasn't ever really explained. So I thought that in telling that story, I wish there was a little bit of clarity in...
So I'll just tell you my perspective on that scene.
Yeah, go ahead.
So my perspective of that scene is it's obvious that Jonathan and his dad do not have a good relationship, if hardly any relationship at all.
Right.
And the way that Lonnie speaks of Will throughout the series sort of solidifies that he and Will don't really have a relationship at all.
Right.
So I saw that scene as more of an opportunity to drive into the fact that Will and Jonathan have a broken home, and it adds to the stress and chaos of trying to figure out where Will is, because they don't have kind of that, like, two-parent support that the other children, perhaps in the friend group, would. So I think it kind of just, like, gives to the point that, like, Lonnie is not really involved in his kids' lives.
Right.
And so it plants sort of this distrust in Jonathan, even more so of his dad, but also his dad, because he is his dad, he's able to plant that little seed of doubt about Joyce.
Yeah.
So now Jonathan has less trust in both of his parents.
Right.
In that moment.
And I think it kind of serves as an introduction to, it introduces Lonnie at the beginning, and then it also kind of gives you as the viewer a reason to be suspicious of him when he suddenly shows up for the funeral, and now he's like supporting Joyce, and it's like, this doesn't make sense, because we saw this guy be a complete dirtbag to his own son.
Right.
So I think that there's rationale in that, but I also think there's a little bit of inconsistency, because if Jonathan hates his father so much, and there's this flashback where he's telling Will, like, you don't really want to hang out with him anyways, like, he doesn't like you or care about you, or, if he has so much animosity toward his own dad, why would he then agree with him that his mom could be the one who's crazy and his dad is right and rational? But I'm not going to necessarily take points off for that. I just think it's a little bit of an inconsistency there.
I wonder if Jonathan, this is just a thought that popped into my head right now, I wonder if Jonathan holds a tiny smidge of bitterness against Joyce, because since his parents have split, it's been established that Jonathan has taken on a huge role in that household at a pretty young age.
Yeah.
Kid's still in high school. So I wonder if he is so quick to agree, or maybe not agree, but not defend the comments about Joyce that Lonnie gives, because he has already been feeling so tired.
Yeah.
At home.
Yeah. And I think that's fair. Overall, though, I think one thing I do like about the plot is how it just slowly reveals more and more as you go along, and it gives you reason to keep watching. It really engages you because you're seeing more and more of what's really behind the curtain as you go. Another thing, like with the plot, I like is that all of Hopper's suspicions are legitimate. They're real concerns that a real human being would have. It's not like this character suddenly got this harebrained idea of maybe it's this evil lab that's causing this child to disappear. Like that would be a really odd thing to think, is that if a child goes missing in a town where nothing really ever happens to it, it was the big bad lab down the street. He has rational, reasonable suspicions that lead him to the lab in, as the story progresses. So I appreciated that about the plot. The reason I did take half a point off, I'll kind of get into that a little bit. I think that this movie does a great job of playing, kind of paying, homage to these classic 80s films, but I think in doing so, there are certain things that are kind of tropey and predictable.
Okay.
So for example, I was kind of making a list as I was watching, Steve sneaking into Nancy's bedroom window. Like, that's classic
True.
trope. The fact that Mike's parents are completely clueless all the time. They're just completely out of touch, unaware of anything that's going on. Kids sneaking out in the middle of the night. The middle schoolers, these kids are total nerds. They have this quirky science teacher who's like their ally. That the fact they're in the AV club, they're not on a baseball team or a football team. They're just these dorky nerds.
That's true.
The fact that the parents never go down into the basement, like, come on, you're telling me the parents they would never go down there and find out what was going on.
Right.
The fact that Hopper's 2 deputies are these bumbling idiot cops. The third act breakup where Lucas gets suspicious of 11, and now they have this breakup of their friend group. This love triangle between Nancy, Jonathan, and Steve. All those things are they're very common in film and in stories because they're things that happen in real life, and they definitely happened in the 80s and they happened in all these 80s films. But I thought those moments overall, although it's a good tribute to classic 80s films, and it's very common in stories and in real life, I thought that some of those moments I just kind of noted were a little tropey and kind of overplayed and overused in film in general. One plot hole I kind of noticed in addition to kind of the one you mentioned is in episode 3 when Nancy goes to Steve's house and she tells Barb, to go home. Like, why don't you just leave? I don't need a ride. Just go home, because she wants to go upstairs with Steve. So Barb leaves and Nancy assumes Barb has left with her car, and we know that other mysterious things have happened. But Barb leaves. She has no ride home, but then she just magically walks through the door of her house at home. Like, Steve was in bed asleep. She was like, Steve, I'm gonna leave. And he didn't wake up. How did Nancy get home?
I guess she walked.
Did she walk all the way home?
Right?
Yeah. I mean, it's never explained, and it's not necessary to explain it, but
I guess if the implication is that Hawkins is a small town, it could be that Steve literally lives a street and a half away.
Right.
But
their house is huge. They clearly don't live in the same neighborhood.
True.
His house is huge. It's in a rich, wealthy neighborhood. She had Barb drive her to Steve's house. I just thought, I never thought about that, but you're right. She had to have walked the whole way home. It's not necessary to the plot. I don't think that's necessarily a flaw. But I thought that was interesting. It's like, she literally is like, Barb, go home. And then she just, I don't need you. Just go home. And then she just magically appears. How did she get home if Barb drove her there? But, and then another thing in the plot that I thought was just really, I thought it was just kind of unbelievable. And I think this did contribute to me taking off half a point, is the scene where Troy they're at the kind of the cliff side. I don't remember what it's called in the film. And he's telling Mike to jump off a cliff. Like, he's like, the height of that cliff, this bully is literally telling Mike to jump off a cliff and die. Like, he's trying to murder a classmate because he peed himself in public. Like, this is really extreme. Like, he pulls a knife on this guy and is literally trying to talk this kid into committing suicide.
Yeah.
Like, that's just to me, I think it's a little bit much. It's a little extreme. Mm-hmm. So I thought, when I was watching it again and really thinking about it, I was like, what? I mean, I'm not sure. There are bad people everywhere, even in middle school. But I was like, and Mike was about to do it. He was about to literally jump to his death. I mean, granted, it made for a really cool scene when 11 came in and saved the day. But I was like, this is a little ridiculous. But overall, I think the plot is exceptional. I love watching a movie or a TV series, any kind of film media, where everything that happens in the plot is for a purpose and for a reason. Every dialogue was for a purpose and for a reason. And as you watch it and rewatch it, it has great rewatchability. You see why the writers and directors and creators made those decisions that they made.
Yeah, I think the intentionality that is everywhere in season 1 really is to be admired, and I think that it deserves the hype that it got.
Yeah.
For sure.
All right.
Okay, moving on to category 2.
Yep.
Is characters, which again is 3 possible points. I gave it 2 out of 3 points.
All right.
And I'll just start through my notes. So, at the beginning, so when Will goes to call 911, because he's hearing something kind of like chasing him or whatever.
Yeah.
This is either good directing or just good acting on the part of Noah Schnapp, but he is trembling when he picks the phone up.
Yeah.
And it's just like so good.
Mm-hmm.
And because I feel like a lot of children actors have a really hard time with like appropriate physical movement in scenes.
Yeah.
So I don't expect a lot out of them. But his little tremble in that scene is so believable that I'm like, oh, okay, like you just buy it. You know, he's literally terrified out of his mind and he cannot stop the shaking.
Yeah.
Like it seems so natural.
Mm-hmm.
But also I think that there's a lot to be said for Winona Ryder's performance in the whole season.
Oh, absolutely. I'd agree.
She has these like really subtle moments, and it's funny because then she has these very large moments through a lot of the season, but it's the subtle moments that I think she really shines the most. She has these like small looks that just like weigh a ton on the screen. She has like a lot of intentionality when she finally disconnects herself from whatever is distracting her that day, whether it's work or whatever, and she actually looks at one of her sons. There's just like it's just the focus, you can tell it's just like laser focus, and like Joyce now nothing else matters,
right?
Like it's just her son or whatever. And I think it's small moments like that are not loud, but say a lot about Winona Ryder's performance that I think are to be admired.
Yeah.
I think it's very entertaining, the opposites that you see in Joyce and Hopper.
Yeah.
They're very opposite through a lot of the series. They have the same goal, but their personalities and sort of, I guess, ways of attacking that problem are just so different that once they finally can kind of find a way to work together, it's very effective. But before that, it's just almost entertaining.
Yeah.
Not to say that I'm trying to like make fun of it or anything like that, but I think it's just something interesting to notice. I think there are some really funny moments. Like there's a scene where the Wheeler family is at dinner and Mike is just like yelling at the dinner table, and Holly is sitting in her like high chair just like sipping juice like looking around, and to me it's just so funny. I think I know some of my notes seem like I'm bouncing around. It's because I was taking notes just from the beginning to the end. There's that whole situation where Hopper lies about where his daughter is. Yeah. And if Hawkins is a small town, there are people who know.
Well, and you get evidence of that when they're in the search party and that lady tells who is it, the science teacher?
Yeah, I think so.
Mr. Clark?
Yep.
She tells him, his daughter died.
Yeah.
Like,
and so it's like, I wonder to myself, why? Why would you lie about it? I'm sure it comes down to the point where that's a very painful and intimate thing to share with somebody that you don't know or trust very well.
Sure.
So that's probably why the lying happens. But it's such an easily disproved lie that it makes me wonder kind of his motivations behind that. But I don't necessarily hold it against Hopper. I think it's probably a very, very hard thing to talk about. So I wrote justice for Barb, but then I wrote in all caps, but also justice for Benny. Because this poor man is the first man who shows, the first person who shows Eleven any kind of kindness. And then he gets shot in the forehead for it. And I hate it. And she has to see it happen. And it's like, you put a smidgen of trust into the first stranger that shows you any kindness, and now this is what happens to them, that probably would associate a feeling of guilt into 11. It's
Right.
like, anywhere I go, people are going to get hurt. Like, is, you know, I feel like that's kind of like a very complicated layer to the character of 11. But it also just makes me so sad for Benny because, I mean, he really was trying to do the right thing, and he was a, you know, upstanding guy with a lot of integrity, and he really just wanted to do the best thing for this girl, and so he used the resource he thought would be best, which is Child Protective Services, not knowing that was going to be cloaked in, you know, a government lie, and they were going to take her back and harm him for it.
Right.
So,
well, and then
dang justice for Benny, please.
Yeah, well, and then he even, like, recants it when she shows up. He's like, actually, you know...
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's like, I think Benny is a great character, and he's you know, one of my, like, favorite characters in this show, and I remember watching it for the first time being like, this guy's my favorite character, and then he dies, and I have a reputation that if my favorite character in a show or a movie will always be the one who dies, but I think that's just how it goes sometimes.
Yeah. My next note is a question, and it is, why is Jonathan the creepiest person ever? So Jonathan is my least favorite character in this whole show.
Yeah.
I feel like he does a lot of terribly creepy things to Nancy, and then he gets rewarded by basically becoming her boyfriend by the end of season 1. I hate it.
Yeah.
And he should not be rewarded for his creepy peeping behavior.
Yeah.
No.
Well, to be fair, he's not her boyfriend at the end. Steve is still her boyfriend at the end.
But it's very obvious that there's some
there's
sort
a
of
love
connection.
triangle between them.
they've got a spark. She's not against the idea. It's made very evident.
Yeah.
So yeah, Jonathan is the reason that this does not have full 3 points.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna go ahead and say that.
Yep.
My next note is Barb needs some stitches. She's bleeding out in the pool. Like, why would she not say, I won't stop bleeding? Her hand is wrapped in a towel and she's still bleeding through it. Why did she not say...
I know.
Like
that happened quite a while ago, and she's still bleeding.
And then Nancy's like, why don't you go home? If I was Barb, I would have gotten in my car and driven to the emergency room.
Yeah.
Barb!
Yep.
Why? Why did you go back out and sit in the pool and bleed out until you got stolen? Oh my gosh. I was like, no!
Mm-hmm.
Another character that I wish I liked more, but I don't, is Mike. He is so tunnel vision in everything. He is a smidge selfish. He is bossy. And don't get me wrong, do I think, in every sort of friend group or even friend pairing, you're going to have one that's like naturally more likely to take charge of a situation, etc., etc. But he's bossy to the point of annoying me.
Interesting.
I don't dislike Mike, but there are certain things about him where I'm like, can you just please stop, Mike, for like half a second. And most of that has to do with the fact that he is so tunnel vision that when he has a goal or current objective, he cannot see anything outside of this. And so he almost comes across a little reckless in that kind of situation, or inconsiderate to anybody outside of that tunnel.
Yeah.
And he is young, so I'm trying not to hold it against him too much. But the other boys are not like that, which is why I made note of it. Lucas, being the cynical one in the group, is honestly probably my favorite thing. I think it's the dynamic that the group needs. They're all very, like, accepting of this strange girl who says nothing with a shaved head. Yeah. And Lucas is like, does nobody notice how weird this is? And I think he's sort of like that voice of reality that, especially Mike, but sometimes Dustin needs as well. And I think that the show sort of paints Lucas to kind of be like this unaccepting, like, inclusive sort of friend, but I didn't see it like that at all.
You mean like exclusive?
Exclusive,
like he's excluding 11?
Yeah, like he tries to exclude 11. I think the show tries to paint him that way, and I don't think it's necessarily fair because I think a healthy cynicism keeps you safe.
Right.
And I think that in a situation like this where your friend is already missing, and now another teenager in the community has gone missing, and then you hear of other people kind of going missing too. I think they mention at the police station that like somebody and his son was out on a boat and went missing or something like that.
I think like deer hunting.
Something like that.
Yeah.
And so it's like now you know that this is now a problem outside of your own friend group.
Right.
And I think that Lucas is the only one that's like, you know, the decisions that we make could like be a problem if we trust people that we don't know.
Right.
So, you know, I think Lucas is a great character and serves that purpose very well. I honestly forgot Holly was a character until I rewatched this show.
Yeah.
Forgot she was a character. I get that she's a toddler and basically says nothing, but she serves zero purpose.
Well, I think that she almost serves zero purpose, except
the scene at Joyce's.
Right.
Yeah.
Which I think is the purpose of that, in addition to it being kind of this tribute to Poltergeist, I think that it is necessary because it's the only time up to that point where someone other than Joyce sees what she's seeing. And so fair. I think for that reason, but it couldn't be an adult, you know, I mean, it could be Hopper.
And I suppose it makes sense to make it a character that isn't old enough to really verbalize and be believed.
And really understand what's going on.
That's true.
So I
guess I'll give Holly that credit. Then she serves that purpose. But otherwise,
I think the other thing she does is she gives thinking about this now, she kind of gives Mike's parents to not focus on what Mike and Nancy are doing.
That's true, I suppose. The youngest always gets the most attention.
Yeah, it's like her...
And especially because it looks like there's quite a few years between Mike and Holly.
Right.
Where there's less years between Nancy and Mike.
Right. And it's like the whole time where 11 is in Mike's house and nobody else is home. Like, why is the mom not there? Oh, well, she's coming in the house with groceries and Holly's in her arm. Like, yeah. So it kind of... In a way, I agree she's an extremely minor character. But I think she also is kind of that catalyst that serves a purpose to why don't Mike's parents ever pay attention to what he's doing? Why don't they pay attention to what Nancy's doing? She's just sneaking out of the house. And so
I'll concede that point.
Yeah.
My next note is that the most perfect casting choice in the entire show is David Harbour as Hopper. I think the whole show is cast very well, so I'm not saying that the other choices are not good.
Yeah.
But I think that I could not picture any other actor in the role of Hopper after watching David Harbour be Hopper. I just think he's ideal for that sort of role. I think he is very good at sort of building the character of Hopper in a way that when he's first introduced, he almost tries to make himself feel very one-sided. And then as you go through the series or the season, you kind of realize he's absolutely not. But he delivers them in such a paced way that he's not showing all the cards of his hand at once.
Yeah.
And I think that makes him very interesting. But I think it's a very good acting choice too, because he is so subtle. Most of the time, and then there are these moments where you just kind of see through the cracks of the armor.
Yeah.
And I think it's very effective acting. So kudos to David Harbour. Okay, so next note, and this kind of goes back to Mike being generally selfish. I understand that he is upset when he thinks that Will is dead, but he becomes so hateful to 11 in that episode. I want to shake him. It's like, you have made the choice to bring 11 into your home and trust her into your friend group. And I get that you're mad and you're upset and you're young and you don't really know how to deal with this whole grief and you think your best friend is dead. So, like, I'm not begrudging any of that. But these are the choices that you made. Yeah. And it's not 11's fault because you've decided to include her in all of this. Especially when you don't even know her or understand her well enough to know that she had no control over this, even despite her psychic powers.
Yeah.
He almost puts too much faith in her psychic powers to brand her as like some sort of superhero that can save Will, because he doesn't take the time or have the patience to learn her in such a way that he would care to have any sort of explanation before just jumping into this is your fault, it's his fault, you're dead sort of thing. And I'm like, that is a huge thing to throw on another child, especially a child who it's obviously has been through so much. So that moment, I'm just like, oh, Mike, please stop. Like, so that's one of the Mike, please stop moments for me.
Yeah. I think that, I think overall that is... But at the same time, I mean, I would agree, but at the same time, it's kind of hard to expect a middle school boy to have that level of maturity.
Yeah.
I think that it's realistic that a middle school boy who's like, this is so cool, we found a superhero girl and she's living in my house, she's gonna help us find Will, and she says she can help us find Will, and here she is leading us to Will's house, which doesn't make any sense, but she said she's seen Will, she recognized him in his picture, and so she's gonna help us find Will, and she's got superpowers, this is like a comic book, and then all of a sudden Will's body is being drug up out of a lake. I think it's difficult for a 12-year-old to have that level of maturity.
I get what you're saying, but I guess for me, it's a huge inconsistency in Mike's character, where, because he's been gunning for this the whole time, it would make way more sense if that had come from Lucas, and he does have a moment, a confrontation with Will and, with Mike and 11, but I believe that way more. And I accept Lucas's confrontation way more than I accept Mike's.
Yeah.
I just think that it's a little inconsistent to Mike's whole, like, the arc he's been going in. It's almost like now I get confused, like, well, then what is it that you want, if not this?
Yeah.
Like, you've been agreeing to this and pushing for this, and now you're acting like you never wanted any of that. So it just feels a little disjointed, I guess, to me, that whole moment from Mike.
Yeah. Well, I think it's the sense that, kind of a theme through the show is, the promises that you make to your friends, and, you don't lie to your friends. It's kind of this level of trust. That's kind of the theme between those kids is, we build a level of trust. And so I think it's more, I took it more of like an impulsive moment where you've put your trust in this total stranger because your best friend is missing, and you felt like you've worked to establish, like, friends have a level of trust between one another, and now you're telling me that I trusted you to find my best friend because he's in danger and he could die, and now you didn't deliver on that promise. So I think that I took it more of, it is an inconsistency if he stayed that way for the rest of the show, but because 11 then uses the radio to let him hear Will's voice, I think that, and he immediately snaps right out of that and comes back, and he's like, oh my gosh, I was wrong, I'm sorry, kind of thing, and he's back on 11, on that side. I took it more of this impulsive moment of grief rather than this innate character ability or character trait of his that's like, well, I'm just going to explode and, everything that I was before was a lie.
Okay. I mean, I can kind of see what you're saying. I think I just see it differently. And maybe part of it is that I felt like the acting wasn't as believable as a lot of Mike's other scenes.
I think that's plausible.
So maybe it comes down to a level of believability for me.
And I do think, personally, just kind of on that, since we're on that kind of topic, I do think that that line where he says, what is wrong with you? Like, I think that is kind of a lackluster line. The whole point of that scene isn't that something's wrong with 11. Like, I always felt like that line seemed out of place there. Mm-hmm. So perhaps it was just the way that scene was portrayed and the way that was written, that it seems less believable as a genuine impulsive reaction of grief. I think that maybe that was the intent, but I would agree. I think that whole scene where he's yelling at her, as they're lifting Will's body out of the the water. I do think that scene was kind of played from Mike's as a character was just a little off-putting.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Okay, so moving to my next note, I wrote, I'm honestly having a hard time seeing the purpose of including Lonnie as much as they do.
I will touch on that when I go into it, but I agree completely.
Yeah, I understand setting him up as far as, like, past, kind of laying the foundation of, like, who the Byers family is, but I think they include him too much, and he becomes kind of throwaway character. I'm having a hard time seeing why they decide to, like, keep him in as much of the first season as possible, as they do. It's very weird to me, and I nobody likes him, so it just makes it feel like, why are you still here,
Well, I do think it's relatively realistic that, when Will dies, Lonnie comes back, and then turns out he's really just in it for the money. Mm-hmm. He's trying to sue. But I also think that at that point in the plot, maybe this would be more of a plot line than a character line. I think at that point in the plot, all the other characters have branched off. Nancy and Jonathan are trying to, figure out what's going on with Barb, what's this Demogorgon thing, the kids and Eleven are on their path, Hopper's on his path, and now Joyce has nobody. And so maybe they did that on a plot level to give Joyce another caveat, like another character to talk to, and then maybe perhaps they made that decision because in that scene where Joyce finds out that you were just here for the money and you don't even know what college Jonathan wants to go to, like, get out of my house. I think that moment for Joyce is very necessary. So I feel like Lonnie's almost just a catalyst for her.
Yeah, that's the thing. He's more of a device than he is like a contributing character.
Yep,
and that's the issue.
Yeah.
Not that I want to like him, because I don't. I don't care to like him. But I think that they just use him as a device.
Yeah.
And that's all.
Yeah.
I also sort of hate Jonathan and Nancy together. I hate it. I wrote myself a question. I wrote, a bro pulls you out of a snot tree hole and suddenly he's cuddle-worthy. Because for some reason that's the moment that Nancy's like... And then they go back to Nancy's house, and she's like, I don't want to be alone. And so he, like, lays on the floor, and then she's like, could you just come up here? And I'm like, oh, my God, kill me.
Yeah.
No, this is stupid. It's so dumb. I hate it. I hate it together. Mm-hmm. And I think that whole scene is so dumb with them in her room or whatever. Mm-hmm. And she doesn't want to, you just come up here. Like, what does it matter? What does it matter if he sleeps on your floor or not? Like, what? Like, I don't... Shut up, Nancy. That's what I wanted to say.
Yep.
So here's a hot take. Okay, you ready for a hot take?
Okay, I'm ready.
Dustin would be a better leader of the friend group.
I do not agree.
Oh!
I do not agree.
I think that he is a very good mediator in the midst of conflict. And I think that he thinks a little more of everybody in the group than Mike does. And so I think that would be my hot take, is that I think Dustin would be a better leader for the friend group.
I think that definitely is a hot take.
Yeah. I think I might get some hate for that, but it's whatever. Obviously there's that pretty apparent Steve shift that happens in episode 7. Mm-hmm. The first time I watched this show, I hated Steve Harrington very much. Uh-huh. And then I watched the rest of the show, past season 1. Uh-huh. And now rewatching season 1, I'm like, dang, Steve really is not bad. Like, he's fine.
I know.
The problem with Steve is not Steve, it's Steve's friends suck.
Yeah.
They suck. And so he does sucky things when he's around them because he wants to be accepted by his friends. But Steve never really initiates the sucky things. It's always Steve's friends. And I never really noticed that the first time I was watching it. But, like, I like Steve so much more now, like, going into it a second time. And obviously, everybody else liked Steve, too, because, you know, fun behind-the-scenes fact is that the Duffer Brothers only had planned for Steve to be a season 1 character, but he was liked so much that they wrote him into the rest of the show. So, and I think that Joe Keery just does a phenomenal job at playing Steve.
Yeah.
So I think it's very well deserved that they kept him on. And I think that the shift in Steve's character and motivation is a pretty good, like, oops, I've changed moment, without being so tropey that it's annoying.
Yeah.
So 3 out of 3 points for them characters. Okay, so since this episode is very massive and we have many notes still left to go through, since we're getting a little long already, we're going to go ahead and cut the episode here. We'll pick up the next episode with Holland's character breakdown and ratings, and then we'll move on to the rest of our categories from there. So until then, thank you for joining us on this episode. We look forward to having you back the next episode. Don't forget that you can follow us on our social medias. We do have Twitter and Instagram at Lion and Mouse Podcast, and our website is lionandmousepodcast.com. You can find our rules of engagement broken down and our notes from each episode. We also have a suggestion box there. You can tell us what you'd like us to review. Until next time, think wide and stay different.